At Thanksgiving dinner, my dad called me a freeloader and said I had to be out by December. I quietly packed, canceled every bill in my name, and the next morning he showed up furious at my apartment. I, 23 am, never thought Thanksgiving would be the day my life would flip upside down. But there I was, sitting at the dining table with a plate of cold turkey in front of me while my dad tore into me like I was nothing. The house was full. My younger brother and his wife sat across from me. My two sisters were at the far end with their husbands, and Mom was in the kitchen pretending she couldn't hear anything. Dad had been drinking since noon, which wasn't unusual for holidays, but this time the alcohol made him mean in a way I hadn't seen before. He started small, making comments about how I was still living at home at 23, how I should have my own place by now, how his generation was already married with kids at my age. I tried to brush it off, tried to focus on my food, but he wouldn't let it go. My brother smirked into his wine glass, and I knew he'd been feeding Dad these ideas for weeks. Then Dad said it. He called me a freeloader, said I was draining the family resources, and told me I had until December to get out. Not even January. December. He gave me 1 month, right there in front of everyone, like he was firing an employee instead of talking to his son. The table went quiet. My sisters looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. My brother nodded along like Dad was making perfect sense. Mom finally came out of the kitchen, but when I looked at her, hoping she'd say something, she just told me to calm down and not ruin Thanksgiving. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just stood up, put my napkin on the table, and walked upstairs to my room. Behind me, I heard Dad telling everyone I was being dramatic, that I needed to learn responsibility. My brother laughed. What Dad didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been covering more than half the bills in that house for the past 2 years. When Dad lost his job during the pandemic, I'd stepped up. I paid the internet bill, the electricity, the water, and even the mortgage twice when he came up short. I never made a big deal about it because he was my father, and I thought that's what family did for each other. I'd been saving for my own place, but every time I got close, something would come up and Dad would need help. I spent the rest of Thanksgiving evening in my room, and by the time everyone left, I'd made my decision. If Dad wanted me out, I'd get out. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. The next morning, I woke up early and started packing. I didn't have much. Most of my stuff fit into my car and a small U-Haul trailer I rented online. While I packed, I made calls. I canceled the internet service that was in my name. I called the electric company and had my name removed from the account. Same with water. I even called the mortgage company and asked them to take me off as a co-signer, which I'd stupidly agreed to 18 months ago when Dad refinanced. The woman on the phone asked if I was sure, told me it might hurt my credit temporarily, but I didn't care anymore. I was done being taken advantage of. By noon, I was finished packing. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. Mom was at her sister's house, and Dad was still sleeping off his hangover. I left my house key on the kitchen counter and drove to the apartment I'd been looking at for months. It was a small one-bedroom place about 30 minutes away, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd put down the deposit that afternoon and signed the lease. For the first time in years, I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my apartment door. It was barely 7, and I stumbled out of bed in my boxers, confused and half asleep. When I opened the door, Dad was standing there, red-faced and furious. He demanded to know what I'd done. He asked why the internet wasn't working, why the electricity had been shut off overnight, why the mortgage company called him saying I'd removed myself as a co-signer. He was yelling so loud that my neighbor across the hall opened her door to see what was happening. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, and let him finish. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, I told him I did exactly what he asked. I moved out. I took my name off everything because this was what being independent looked like. If he wanted me gone, then I was gone completely. Dad's face turned even redder. He said I was being spiteful, that I was trying to ruin the family, that I owed him for raising me. I asked him if he remembered who paid the mortgage in March when he was short. I asked if he remembered who covered the electric bill all summer when his unemployment ran out. He went quiet. Then he switched tactics. He said he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that he was just trying to motivate me, that Thanksgiving got out of hand because he'd been drinking. He asked me to come back, said we could work something out, said Mom was upset and wanted me home. I told him no. I told him I'd spent 2 years putting my life on hold to keep that house running while he drank and complained, and I was done. If he couldn't afford the bills, that wasn't my problem anymore. He was the one who called me a freeloader in front of the entire family, so now he could figure it out himself. Dad tried to push past me into the apartment, but I blocked the doorway. I told him if he didn't leave, I'd call the police. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Panic. Real panic. He realized I wasn't coming back, that I wasn't going to cave like I always did. He left without another word, and I closed the door behind him. The rest of that day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom called 6 times, my older sister called twice. Even my brother sent a text asking what my problem was. I ignored all of them. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. By the evening, Mom showed up. Unlike Dad, she didn't yell. She knocked softly and asked if we could talk. I let her in, and she sat on my couch looking around at the bare apartment with this sad expression. She told me Dad didn't mean what he said, that he was stressed about money and took it out on me. She said the house was a mess without me there, that things weren't working and Dad didn't know how to fix them. She asked if I could at least help them get back on their feet, maybe pay 1 or 2 bills until Dad found something stable. I asked her if she remembered Thanksgiving. I asked if she remembered sitting in the kitchen while Dad humiliated me in front of everyone. She looked down at her hands and said she was sorry, but family was supposed to forgive each other. I told her forgiveness didn't mean letting people walk all over me. I told her I'd given 2 years of my life and most of my savings to keep that house running, and the thanks I got was being called a freeloader and kicked out. I wasn't going back, and I wasn't paying their bills anymore. Mom started crying. She said they couldn't afford the mortgage without me, that they might lose the house. She said Dad was too proud to admit he needed help, but they were desperate. I felt bad for her, I really did, but I also knew that if I gave in now, nothing would change. I'd be right back where I started, funding their life while mine stayed on hold. I told her I was sorry, but they'd have to figure it out. She left without saying anything else. Update 1. 2 weeks went by, and I didn't hear from anyone in my family. My phone stayed quiet, which was both a relief and oddly painful. I threw myself into work, picked up extra shifts at the warehouse, and started settling into my apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that meant everything. Then my older sister called. She was different from the others, calmer, more reasonable. She asked if we could meet for coffee, and I agreed. We met at a place halfway between my apartment and the old house, and she got straight to the point. She told me things were bad at home. The electricity had been shut off twice already, and Dad still hadn't found stable work. He was picking up odd jobs here and there, but it wasn't enough. Mom was working extra hours at the grocery store, but even that barely covered groceries. My brother wasn't helping because he had his own family to worry about, and my other sister was dealing with her own financial problems. I asked why she was telling me this, and she said because she understood why I left. She admitted that Dad had been wrong to treat me the way he did, and she'd told him as much. But she also said that despite everything, they were still family, and maybe there was a way to work things out. I told her I appreciated her reaching out, but I wasn't interested in being the family's ATM anymore. If Dad wanted to apologize, really apologize, he knew where to find me. Until then, I was moving on with my life. She nodded like she expected that answer. Before she left, she told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself, even if it meant the family was falling apart. That hit harder than I expected. A few days later, I got a text from my brother. It wasn't an apology or anything close to it. He said I was being selfish, that Mom was crying every night because of me, that I was tearing the family apart over one stupid comment. He said Dad had too much pride to admit he was wrong, but everyone knew he regretted what he said. I didn't respond. If Dad regretted it, he could tell me himself. Update 2. 3 weeks after I moved out, Dad finally called. It was late at night, and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice was different, quieter, tired. He asked if we could talk, said he wanted to meet in person. We met at a diner near my old high school. Dad looked older than I remembered, like the past few weeks had aged him. He ordered coffee but didn't drink it, just stared at the cup while I waited for him to say something. Eventually, he told me he was sorry. He said Thanksgiving was a mistake, that he'd been drinking too much and took out his frustrations on me. He admitted he'd been struggling with losing his job, with feeling like a failure, and seeing me still living at home reminded him of his own shortcomings. He said he lashed out because it was easier than facing his own problems. I listened, but I didn't say anything. Apologies were easy. I wanted to know if anything would actually change. Dad told me he didn't expect me to come back, that he understood why I left. But he asked if I'd consider helping them one last time, just enough to catch up on the mortgage and keep the house. He promised he'd pay me back once he got steady work, said he'd even put it in writing if I wanted. I asked him if Mom put him up to this, and he shook his head. He said it was his idea, that he couldn't stand seeing Mom work herself to exhaustion while he sat around feeling sorry for himself. He said he needed to fix this, but he couldn't do it alone. I told him I'd think about it, and he nodded. He didn't push, didn't guilt-trip me. He just said he understood and that he'd wait to hear from me. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to help because despite everything, they were still my parents. But another part of me knew that helping them now would just reset the cycle. I'd be back to covering their expenses while they figured things out, and eventually, we'd end up right back where we started. I decided to call my older sister the next day. I asked her for an honest assessment of their situation, and she didn't sugarcoat it. She said they were 2 months behind on the mortgage. The bank had already sent a warning letter, and if they didn't catch up soon, they'd start foreclosure proceedings. She said Dad was trying, but his odd jobs weren't enough, and Mom's income barely kept food on the table. I asked her what would happen if I didn't help, and she said they'd probably lose the house. They'd have to sell or let the bank take it, and then they'd be looking at renting somewhere smaller. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but it would be hard. I made my decision. I called Dad and told him I'd help, but only on my terms. I'd pay 1 month of the mortgage to stop the foreclosure process, but that was it. After that, they were on their own. I wasn't coming back, I wasn't co-signing anything else, and I expected to be paid back within a year. If they couldn't manage that, they'd need to consider selling the house and downsizing. Dad agreed immediately. He sounded relieved, almost grateful, and he promised he wouldn't let me down. I sent the money the next day, and true to his word, Dad sent me a written agreement acknowledging the loan. It wasn't legally binding, but it was something. Update 3. It's been 2 months since Thanksgiving, and things have settled into a new normal. I haven't moved back home, and I don't plan to. My apartment is still small and bare, but I've started making it feel like mine. I bought a decent couch, hung up some posters, and even adopted a cat from the shelter down the street. Dad found a job in early December, nothing glamorous, just warehouse work like what I do, but it's steady and it pays the bills. He's been making payments toward what he owes me, small amounts but consistent. Mom cut back her hours at the grocery store, and from what my sister tells me, things are slowly stabilizing. We don't talk much, Dad and I. We text occasionally, mostly about practical things like the loan or holiday plans, but the relationship isn't what it used to be. Maybe it never will be. Part of me is okay with that. My brother still thinks I overreacted, and we haven't spoken since that text. My sisters check in on me regularly, though, and I'm grateful for that. They've told me that Thanksgiving changed something in the family, that people are starting to see how much I was actually doing behind the scenes. Mom invited me over for Christmas, and I'm still deciding if I'll go. Part of me wants to believe things can get better, but another part of me knows that going back, even for a day, might undo all the boundaries I've worked so hard to set. What I do know is that I'm not the same person I was at that Thanksgiving table. I'm not the kid who stayed quiet while his father humiliated him, who swallowed his pride and kept paying bills because that's what family does. I stood up for myself, and even though it cost me relationships and caused pain, I don't regret it. Sometimes the price of self-respect is loneliness, but I'd rather be alone and free than surrounded by people who take me for granted. I'll figure out Christmas when it gets here. For now, I'm just focused on building the life I should have started 2 years ago.